and good to see so many people joining for this webinar, or for this Academy webinar. My name is Sjoerd Gras. I'm heading Product Management and Field Operations and Marketing within NIPO, and in that role I'm responsible for, amongst others, security and compliance. And that's also the reason why I'll be doing this presentation today, because we're going to talk about a compliance subject. While Paul's figuring out who this is, and we'll mute the line. I'm not going to talk about GDPR. We'll talk about, today we'll talk about GDPR, why it's important. That's the context that we will be talking about. We'll not go into the GDPR detail. Rather, we'll talk a lot about how you can use Nfield features to help you assist in your GDPR compliance. However, having said that, it's good to do a very quick overview of what we're talking about. I'm pretty sure all of you by now will have a good idea of what GDPR is, and if you haven't, then it's absolutely time to get a good idea of what GDPR is. New European data legislation going into effect this Friday, so this week it will be effective for all companies doing business in the European Union or with EU residents, and that's pretty much every international business around the globe. So there's a lot of companies impacted by this. It will give bigger responsibility for companies on how they're handling data, and it will give more rights to consumers about how their data is handled, so more control for consumers. And it will impact market research, as in market research, of course, we collect a lot of personal data about people. So hence also this webinar to walk you through the sort of Nfield features. GDPR has a lot of directives stating, what you can do, how you can manage personal data, the rules around managing and collecting and processing personal data, what you need to do in order to be legally allowed to have that data or to collect that data or to process that data, and the rights that EU citizens have, they're called data subjects in the law, to actually understand what data you have on them, to ask them to change that data because it's incorrect, or to ask you to stop processing that data. So there's lots of rights, and these are just a few. They have more rights, but these are just a few rights that EU citizens get that they didn't previously had, or at least not so explicitly and not across the board in all EU countries. And those directives have impact on how you work with data. So we've looked at our data collection platform, Nfield, and looked at how can we help you comply with all those directives that are in GDPR. And we've, there's 4 important sort of items in GDPR that have where Nfield can actually help you become more compliant. One is informing and consent, and I'll talk more about these later on. The other one has to do with accessing data and editing data, as we're collecting a lot of data. Tracking changes that you make to data while you're making it, but also afterwards, and data security. 4 important parts where Nfield can actually, some features can assist you in your compliance. Having said that, it's also good to understand your role and NIPO's role, because NIPO's responsibility is with the Nfield platform. We need to make sure that we're allowed to process your data. That's something we've arranged in our contract and our terms and conditions, that we keep your data safe, that we allow you to realize your GDPR requirements. So we have the functionality in there that you can do what you need to do in order to be GDPR compliant, and to remove data when we're no longer allowed to process your data, so when your contract ends. That doesn't make you automatically GDPR compliant, because Nfield, the data collection, is only one part of the systems that you will be using. You'll also be using data processing software, reporting software. You might be using a panel application. All of the functionality that's in Nfield has nothing to do with those applications. So you need to build up your own processes around GDPR compliance. Our functionality will help you facilitate whatever processes you have for the Nfield part of your data collection process. So I want to be that absolutely clear about it, because we've had questions from customers: if I use Nfield, am I GDPR compliant? No. Also because you can use Nfield in a way that's not GDPR compliant. So you need to make your own procedures, and I trust pretty much all of you will have made your own procedure around GDPR compliance. And in this webinar, we'll tell a bit more about some of the features in Nfield that can help you actually conduct things that you need to do under GDPR. So 4 things, as I mentioned, that I want to look at. But also I'll change the order a little bit. I want to start with security. And before I do that, let's look at where these features are available in Nfield, because we haven't implemented them all in the same place. And we've actually looked at where can we best do it, because what are the tools that people are using most for accessing their data and doing activities, and where can we implement them in time for GDPR kicking in. So what I'll be demoing today, all the features that you'll be seeing today will be available in the update that's going out later this week. I think my colleagues are now preparing an email going out that there'll be an update tomorrow. So this will be available in Nfield from tomorrow onwards, with one exception. There's a functionality I will be demoing today, which is deleting interviews. The interview data for a record. That functionality is still under development. So I'll be showcasing it, but it won't be in the update of today. It will be in the update coming after this one. So where can you access the features that I'll be showcasing today? For Nfield Online, in the Nfield Online Manager. So that's also the tool that I'll be using most for the demo today. For Nfield CAPI, we've chosen to put the functionality in the Nfield tool. And it's a tool that I think most CAPI customers will be familiar with, where you do your bulk uploads, uploading sample, interviewers, assignments, quotas. Many of you will be using the Nfield tool in addition to the CAPI manager. And for automation, the functionality is available also in our APIs, both for CAPI and online. Okay, so let's look at data security. I think you're all aware, and if not, then you're aware now, that we're ISO 27001 certified, and it basically is an international standard for data security. At NIPO, we take data security very seriously, and we've been certified now for the 3rd year in a row, and it means that an independent party is basically going through all our processes, how we manage your data, how we manage the infrastructure to make sure that it complies with international security standards. And for us, this is a very important sign, because it tells you that you don't have to worry about the information security. You can trust us to keep your data safe. In addition to having strong procedures, independently audited strong procedures, we also encrypt data all the way. So that means that everywhere in the system your data is encrypted. And we regularly test for disaster recovery scenarios. So that means that if something might go wrong, we'll still be able to continue, we'll be able to restore the data and make sure your data is safe and your data is all there. Our sub-process is not just NIPO that's ISO 27001 certified, it's also all our sub-processors. So for example, Microsoft, the company that we work with to host our infrastructure, is fully ISO 27001 certified for the data centers that we are using. We have data breach procedures. So if, and we don't expect it, but might a data breach occur and be identified, then those procedures allow us to report that breach as soon as possible to you, so you can comply with the GDPR requirement to report this to your data protection authority. And we have a data protection officer, it's Gilly Abbott-Jones, who helps us in our GDPR compliance and all data related matters. So that's for security. Moving on to informing and consent. There's a number of legal bases for processing data in GDPR, and the one that we think is most used within market research will be consent, and that's basically asking or telling people this is what you want to do with your data. That's informing, and then asking them, are you okay with that? You've all probably seen lots of emails recently where you asked to opt into receiving newsletters from people. Asking consent for processing data is basically nothing else than just asking a question, can we process your data? And asking questions is what Nfield is really good at, right? You can present information, ask questions. So if you don't have a system for obtaining consent, you might consider using Nfield and using the interview to actually register consent. You can do it as part of the interview. And then automatically also the consent is stored with your interview data. And I'll just show you a few examples. The examples that I'm going to show you, by the way, the demo, we've decided not to do it on the live system. We could, but even though this session is recorded, we think that the majority of the people will find it easier to go afterwards through the PowerPoint. So rather than go through a live system, we've added screenshots from the live environment. If someone wants, I can still go to the live environment, but we thought this for information purposes would be a better approach. So here's a screenshot of an interview. Basically it's a welcome screen. You can put whatever you want on this welcome screen. I think we can all conclude that from in informing what the survey is about, this is very minimal and probably too minimal. But you could use a screen like this to tell people, hey, we're doing a survey. The survey is about this subject, and then put the information that you need to put in there, so people know what they're consenting to, and then use questions in the interview to ask consent. And you could, you could ask consent for the whole questionnaire, but you can also break it up in separate parts. If you, and then basically use layered consent and routing to have respondents routed to parts of the survey. So, for example, if someone says, I only want to consent to questions about my health, but not about my income, you can use standard routing functionality. That's part of Nfield to only show the questions about health and not the questions about income. And then also this choice will be registered in the data. People can also not give consent, so they say, I don't want to participate in your surveys, and you can screen them out based on that answer. And while you're screening them out in Nfield, you can assign custom response codes. You could, on this button, action, you could sort of say, I put a custom response code there, so I know these people screened out because they didn't want to give consent. That's visible both as part of your sample, so we store it in the para data, we store it in Nfield in the sample overview, and you can also view it in your monitor screen, both in CAPI and online. They have the same sort of table where you can see unscreened out what the reason was why someone screened out. Okay, then another feature that we've built in is something that we didn't have. Everything I've shown so far was already in Nfield. This is something that we've added, or at least where we've added to Nfield, is that we're tracking what you do with your data. So you have an audit trail, what happened to the data. We don't track everything, so we track a number of events in the system. And one of the things that we track is when people upload sample, when they edit sample, or when they delete sample. We also track when people log on, where they add surveys, delete surveys, that sort of stuff. There's a work log there. I'm not sure if everyone knows that work log is there, so I'm going to show you how you can access it. In the Nfield Online Manager, the work log is located in the domain settings. In the CAPI Manager, also in the domain settings. So you need to be a domain administrator in order to download the work log. The location is a little bit different between the managers, but it's both domain settings. And you click the button, you get a dialog that tells you which period do you want to download the log. Default is a week. If you want to do longer, it's take longer. If you do a year, it's going to take a while for that thing to actually collect all the data. So we do that in the background, same as downloads. You can go to the activities tab. That's where you'll find your work log. Once it's ready, you can download it. It's a CSV file. If you open it in Excel, it will look something like this. It will show you timestamp, the user, survey, what they've done. It's not perfect in terms of formatting. We know it's not perfect in terms of formatting. We have a card to improve the formatting, but all the information you need is actually in there. So you can see people logging on, you can see service being published, you can see sample uploaded, interview deleted. That stuff is all there. So in case you need to show proof that you have done things and you have changed data in Nfield, this is the way how you can prove that the data has been changed. If you find something strange in your data, this is also a log that you can use to figure out why it looks this strange.
I got a question, Sjoerd.
Yep.
Not so much about the log itself, but about the managers. Is there anywhere on the roadmap that these two will be merged together? So it will look like more than the online manager.
Yes, that's a good question. Yes, we're actually working on that right now. So we have on our, and when we started with the online manager, it has always been our intention to move also CAPI to this new infrastructure. We're not happy with this really big Nfield tool. There's too much functionality in the Nfield tool that we think needs to be in the manager. But unfortunately, from a technological point of view, it's very time-consuming to implement those functionalities in the existing CAPI manager. So we've already, on our roadmap, projected that this year we want to integrate both managers into one manager. So CAPI manager will move to the online manager. Once CAPI goes to the online manager, that automatically also means that all these functionalities that I'm demoing today, which exist in the online manager but need the Nfield tool to work with CAPI, will become available in the online manager.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. So moving on to accessing, editing data. Basically, you are in the process of collecting data, and or have collected data, and a respondent calls you and says, "Listen, I would like to know what data you have on me." And it might be that you're using might be, for example, you use multiple systems, so you might have a panel system, but there might still also be information in the Nfield system, or there might be in your data reporting system. This functionality is only for the Nfield part of where you store data, but the data that's in Nfield. What's important if someone contacts you and says, "Hey, what information do you have on me?" is that you can easily find it, that you can look at the data. If it's incorrect, that you can change it. If someone says, "I don't want to work on this anymore," you can, "I don't want you to work with it anymore," you can anonymize it or you can delete it. If you're done with your field work, you might have a procedure in place where you say, "Hey, well, once my field work is done, actually, I'm going to anonymize my surveys because I don't need the contact information anymore, but I still want to keep the collected data for a while before I remove it from the Nfield system." That's what we have features built into Nfield platform. That's part of what I want to show you now, is that set of features that we have there. Let's first start with finding respondents. For now, that's only available in the Nfield tool and in the API. But in the Nfield tool, you can use it both for CAPI as well as for online. So you can use it for both modes. Basically, we just had a demo this morning from the development team, and they have built it into our online manager, but that version of the manager will only go live within a few weeks. So for now, for the first few weeks, and hopefully you're not getting a lot of requests in the first few weeks, but in the first few weeks you would need to use the Nfield tool for all modes, or build the functionality yourself on top of the API. So how does it work? For those of you using CAPI, this will be a familiar screen, the Nfield tool, where a lot of copy functionality is available. We've made an extra button there that says Search Respondent. And what you can do by clicking that button,
yeah, there was a hiccup in the connection, but the screen is there now.
Okay. What you can do by when you click that button is that you're asked to upload a file.
Okay.
And in that file, you can specify for which sample record fields you want to search. And in this case, I said let's search for Jennifer Aniston, whose email address is ganiston@moviecareer.com. It's an email address I made up, so this is not really Jennifer Aniston. So if you input that, and then the Nfield tool will do a search across the surveys, both for copy and online, and we will return the surveys which have a j.aniston@moviecareer.com in the sample table. So if you're on copy, rather than email address, you could also use physical address, or you can use a city, or you can use a name, as long as you specified those fields as part of your sample data. So, and this is also what we recommend you to do as a practice. In order for this to work properly, it's good to have personal identifiable information stored that in your sample table, always, rather than in your interview data. So that would mean that if you collect, for example, a telephone number during the interview, that we recommend that you always use the *sample data command to make sure that that data is stored in your sample data rather than in your interview data. And with that way you can search on it, but you can also easily remove it from the survey, and I'll talk about that later.
Question coming in about searching. Can I search with wildcards?
Good question. I don't know. I'll have to look that one up.
All right. We will get back to you later on.
But typically, I'll look it up, but I'm not sure whether it's actually needed, because this is a cross-survey search functionality, right? So the question is, what will you typically be using it for? The purpose that we've designed it for is that you have a respondent that comes to you and asks, what information do you have on me? And typically, we expect you to have very defined fields that you'll be searching on. But nonetheless, I'll answer the question, and Paul will come back to you over email later.
Yep. And yeah, we're now getting more and more questions.
Very good. Keep on coming.
All right. Does surveys without sampling point and addresses also support sample data?
Yes, they do.
Well,
yeah,
easy as that.
Yeah. Yes, they do.
Another question coming in is Nfield tool. Where can we find it?
The Nfield tool, good question. The Nfield tool is available on our support website, support.nipo.com. There's a section there that's called Useful Tools, and from that section you can download the Nfield tool. If you do not have access to our support site, then please reach out to your account manager at Nipo, or to the person who's managing the Nipo contract within your organization. Because they should be able to give you access, or make sure that you get a copy of the Nfield tool. Okay. So this is for searching across surveys. It searches across all the surveys. Now you found your respondent. Let's look at how we can download his data. You could, of course, already use the existing functionality, which is download the data for a survey. But we've also made it possible to download an individual's data. So what we added is that, and again, you can do this in the useful tool, which gives the ID. on the Nfield tool, you give the idea, you can do it on our API, and you can do it for Nfield Online in the Manager, which is what this screenshot shows, is that we've added the ability on a sample record, download the data for just that sample record. The format is not perfect, because what you get right now is that you get an U record, an O file, and then paradata CSV, and you'll need to make something readable for the respondent from that before you can actually give it to a respondent and say, hey, this is the data that we have on you for this survey in Nfield. We're adding a var file because we thought it good if we give you the data that we also give you the metadata, so you have this map of what the data means. And we're thinking about making the format of the downloaded data more respondent friendly. If your respondent has participated in multiple surveys, you'll have to go into each of these surveys and download the data for for the respondent from each of the surveys individually. We haven't made functionality available to just one big button where you can say, give me all the data of this respondent. We could have done, but GDPR is also very explicit that it wants to limit in its intention profiling and combining of data. And for that reason, we've decided that, and also given that we don't expect Nfield to become a storage platform, given data minimization and storage limitation requirements, we expect actually as soon as you're done with data collection that at some point in time you'll say, okay, no longer need the data in Nfield, I'm going to remove the data from Nfield. That this will, if you have a respondent, they won't have participated in a lot of surveys, so it's fine to do it on a survey by survey basis. But of course, you can also download the whole set and then just isolate this one respondent from. Okay. Looking at changing data, you can already change data. If you want to do that now, you can do it by changing data in by uploading the sample file again. You can do that in the manager, or you can do it in the interface of in the Nfield tool, but you would only be allowed to change data doing that for records which didn't have an interview. So basically, if you upload a new sample file, it appends the data that's already in Nfield. So it starts looking which records do I already have, and if something has changed, they change it. But you couldn't do it if the record was already logged for interviewing, and we've changed that. So now you can actually, if you now upload a sample file and you change some data in there and the record was already used in interviewing, it will change that information for you. You can also edit it on an individual sample record through the API, through the Nfield tool, and in the manager, in the Nfield Online Manager, what you'll do is if you go to the sample overview, you can just click on the table and edit individual fields. The one field that you can't edit is the respondent key, because we see that as a unique identifier for the interview, so that's uneditable. System fields are uneditable, but all the information that you've added as part of the sample, whether by uploading or whether collected through the interview using the sample data command, is editable on an individual level or using file upload as bulk. So the existing change here is that you can do it on an individual level, but also that you can change records that were already used for collecting data.
I got a question coming in. How to delete the data for a particular respondent from both sample data and closed-ended data? Is it in one go, or are those separate events?
I'll get back to that later.
All right.
So it's actually one of the things that are still on my list to discuss. So let's wait and I'll pop up. So this for changing. What you can also do is anonymize your server, pseudonymize or anonymize. I'm not going to go into the difference between the two, but basically removing personal identifiable information from your interview data. And this works as long as you stick to the best practice where we say personal identifier should be in your sample data. Collected data should be in your interview data. As long as you stick to that practice, what you can do is that we in Nfield offer you functionality to actually remove identifying information from the sample data. We don't allow you to remove identifying information from the interview simply because of the fact that every survey is different. Interview data is continuously different structured. It's very complex to remove data from that in Nfield. You can of course always do that downstream in your DP. You know, if you throw it away from Nfield downstream, you take out the identifiers from your interview data. It's also anonymized, but for Nfield, so as long as your survey is in Nfield, anonymization, pseudonymization is done on the sample data. But if you stick to the best practice of always storing personal identifiers in the sample data and not in your interview data, this functionality will actually help you in anonymizing and pseudonymizing your data. So what you can do is what we've added is the ability to remove sample data columns, and in the manager, there's the online manager, we've added a button. In the useful tool, we've also added a button. And the behavior that I have is quite similar. If you click this, you can specify which columns you want to have cleared. You can specify individual columns. You can do one column, multiple columns, or all columns. And this will clear all information from the sample table. The only column that you can't, again, the columns that you can't do is system data and respondent keys. So there will still be a record that we have an interview there, but no longer any identifying information. Why don't we remove the system fields? Is that from an interview you can always go back into how was the interview collected, at what point in time was the interview collected, how many invitations did we need to send in order to get this interview, so you can still have the information that you need to do for example, quality control. Okay, so you can anonymize all sample records, and you just hit this button, do your action on all the records. You can also filter the results at first, and if you then clear the information, it will only be done on the filtered set, or you can do it on an individual respondent. You can filter out up to an individual respondent. You can also select the individual respondent from the sample table. You get a submenu. That's the same cross item there. If you click it, you get the same submenu, and you can decide what information you want to clear. So then to the next question, deleting data from a survey. The question was, if we delete data from a survey, do I delete everything in one go, or is there the sample deletion and the interview data deletion, is that separated? And it's actually a very good question, because we implemented something that afterwards we said, ooh, this is a little bit coarser than we want it to be. Right now, if you delete an interview, it will delete all the data from the interview. So it will delete the sample data, the custom sample data. So we'll keep the system data there, it will keep the respondent key there, but it will delete all the other data, sample data and interview data. But we've already concluded that that's not the way how we want this to work. So we would like this delete button to actually give you the option, what do you want to delete, the sample data, the interview data, or both. So this is a change that we will be making to this functionality, but right now it deletes all the data for this record. It is on an individual record basis, so you do it record by record. There's no bulk delete interview data, but you do it on a record by record. And once you delete the data for the survey, it also automatically adjusts the quotas for that survey. So in your running field work, if you need to delete a record because your respondent came back to you and said, hey, I want to revoke my consent, and you've chosen to delete it, then this will automatically correct your quotas. But it also means that if your field work was finished and you've met your targets and then you delete data from it, it will look like you didn't make your quotas, because also then it will adjust the quotas for your survey. You can delete it on an individual basis, but of course, we would also like to stimulate you that if you don't need the data anymore, all the other data anymore, you just delete the whole survey. That's the other option. Once you delete the survey, the data is no longer available within Nfield. We do keep a backup, and that's available for 35 days, but that backup is only for disaster recovery purposes. So if you hit delete here, you'll get a dialog that says, are you really sure that you want to delete this survey? And it says the survey name in there. And then if you hit, yes, I'm really sure that I want to do this, then that's a final action. There's no way to restore it because we won't restore data for individual tenants. We only keep the backups for disaster recovery purposes. So that means if something happens to the Nfield system, we can put all the data back, but we don't put data back for individual domains. We don't put data back on request. We only use it for data recovery purposes. After 35 days, as mentioned, the data is also automatically removed from our backup. So whatever you had in there no longer exists on any of the NIPO servers. I hope this answers the question on deleting a record. This is in very quick what we wanted to show. It's going to go live later this week. I expect it to go live tomorrow, except for the delete functionality as mentioned, because we're still easing out some issues with that feature. Our goal in all of this is to provide functionality that so that you, our customer, can address GDPR controls in line with your data collection activities. So we've looked at how can we build this functionality in so that it feels natural with all of the other, the way that you're managing your field work. Try to fit them as much into the tooling that we're already offering. Again, Nfield doesn't make you GDPR compliant. It just offers some functionality to help you with your GDPR compliance. So it's up to you to decide how you'll use these features in your work process.
Yeah, we got a question that was asked before, but now I think it's the right time. They're talking about a service provider agreement. How, if, and when can we get a GDPR compliant service provider agreement in writing? Is it needed? If so, when can we get it?
All of you have a contract for using, or not necessarily you, but your organization will have a contract for using Nfield. In that contract, or part of that contract is the terms and conditions for Nfield, and part of those terms and conditions are, that's actually Article 11, a number of clauses that deal with processing data, processing your data in Nfield, and that should be sufficient, according to our legal team, that's sufficient for processing your data. So there would be no additional data processing agreement needed. However, if you feel otherwise, then please reach out to your account person who can then take this up with our legal team to sort of see if we need an additional custom DPA, data processing agreement, sorry for the abbreviation. But our contract for Nfield, which we updated earlier this year, already has all the data processing verbiage that is required in order to process your data in it.
Okay, I got another question. Nfield Online user sending out emails. The question is, what can we tell respondents about storage of IP addresses? Do we store IP addresses? If so, what can we tell respondents about it?
Yes, the whole world stores IP addresses because IP addresses is how we on the internet send information from place A to place B, and also our servers have an IIS log, and the standard functionality of those logs is that IP addresses are stored, but the logs, both in our system as well as on the our email provider systems, are regularly refreshed, and I believe the storage, I can look it up, but I believe overall those logs have a lifetime of no more than either 2 or 4 weeks.
Okay.
And there's no way to turn it off, by the way, other than not logging. Any other questions?
Yeah, you're almost at the end of the...
Yeah. So if you, this is what we wanted to share about how you can use Nfield for your GDPR compliance. If you want to have more information on Nfield, then please reach out, visit our website and look at the NIPO blog. It has some articles on GDPR there in relation to Nfield and market research. Also, please, feel with this invitation for this academy, we sent out an Nfield GDPR toolkit that has all the information that everything I presented plus a few additional things. If you want to have more information on GDPR, I think your legal team will have enough to say about it, but also you can look online. One of the sources we've used is www.eugdpr.org. They have a lot of information that might be useful. Of course, there are other sources as well.
Okay, we give the people some time to type in their question for a couple of minutes. If we get something in, I will ask Sjoerd. If it stays quiet, then then that's the end. I got a question coming in. Can you change the sample fields, add or delete them? I think he's referring to the sample table. I think you can just add sample fields.
Yes, you can add sample fields. It's not done, there's no functionality in the interface to, I'm not sure whether this is for online or for CAPI, but the way it works is the same. You can add custom sample fields by uploading and just adding a field in the Excel that you use to upload the sample. If you add a field, that field will also be added to the sample table. I'm not sure if you can change the sample column. I'm looking at Frank here, who's sitting next to me, who's nodding no. So you can't change the name. So once you've picked the name, it's there. But what you can do is, of course, if you made a mistake, you delete it, you change it in your Excel, you upload it again, and there's your sample data again. So you can also use the delete functionality to, it's not meant for it, but you can use it to correct changes that you've made in your sample table. But be careful doing this when your fieldwork has started.
Yeah, and this is actually, it was for the platform KP.
Okay.
So if it works the same, then it's fine.
Yes.
All right. Thank you from this question person. I do not get any other questions coming in. I did get some technical questions, but I will pass them to the help desk after this session. No means to do that now. I would like to thank everyone then, because I don't see anything coming in. After this session, a recording will be sent to you as well as the presentation. And if you have any questions, just reach out to your account manager or the help desk. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.